Imagine taking over an entire Olympic sport in crisis and leading it all the way to Olympic history. That's exactly what Phil Andrews did as CEO of USA Fencing.
Maya absolutely tore apart the Italians and arguably was one of our biggest reasons that we won the gold medal.
And that gold wasn't luck. It came after Phil rebuilt culture, stabilized membership, secured major sponsors, and helped turn a fractured sport into a rising Olympic powerhouse. But right after that historic success, Phil faced a new kind of pressure no CEO ever wants.
We got put through the ringer, no question about it, which included death threats, people showing up in my house, our team was being attacked.
Today, you'll learn exactly how Phil rebuilt trust, managed crisis, sustained growth, and kept his team aligned under extreme public pressure so you can apply the same strategies to your leadership challenges.
You don't turn around organizations by making one solo decision. You make them by making incremental good decisions.
You'll discover the day one move that stabilized a broken culture, the high-stakes Olympic decision that changed everything, the backlash that hit right after the gold, and the tools that Phil used to lead through intense public pressure. Let's get into it.
Go through a little bit of what's happened in Paris and the Olympic and Paralympic Games and what we've been up to here at USA Fencing and perhaps across the Olympic and Paralympic world and sport for the last little while.
Yeah, so what's been happening?
It's been a year. So I was on last just before the Olympic Games and we were hoping for a great Paris. We had a phenomenal Paris. Lee Kiefer defending her Olympic title. So she's now a two-time back-to-back gold medalist. You mentioned in your intro that we won the Olympic gold in women's foil. For those who don't know fencing, which I would imagine is most people, the historic superpower in women's foil is Italy. So we had Project Beat Italy, very simply titled, here's the project, here's what we want to do. So that involved a lot of analysis, a lot of work from particularly our head coach, who went on to become Olympic Coach of the Year, Ralf Bistorff, himself a silver medalist for Germany, in how do we go out there and beat the unbeatable Italians. It's not quite Miracle on Ice, but it's close. So we went out there with our four, and indeed the way that fencing in team works, and I have to tell this story, is that you have three starters. And across the entire tournament, you can use your one substitute, that fourth athlete, once. But once you put them in, they're in for the rest of the tournament. You can't reverse that. And we're up. I'm in the stands. We're up against Italy. We're fencing well. And Ralph subs out in the Olympic final, Jackie Dubrovic, our second most experienced athlete, and arguably one of our leaders of our team. She's actually on our board of directors here at USA Fencing now, post-games, and puts in Maya Weintraub, a young Princeton athlete who becomes an Olympian by steps in on the field of play. And I'm nervous, I have to admit. Taking out Jackie, this experienced stalwart of the team, and putting in Maya. And it was
on the biggest
genius.
scale in the world, on the biggest match of everyone's life.
Exactly, in front of thousands of screaming fans, most of whom are there supporting Italy, because Italy is closer to France than the United States is. In a palace, we were in the Grand Palais, in this beautiful ornate setting, in the country that's the home of the sport. It was the biggest possible stage. Maya absolutely tore apart the Italians, and arguably was one of our biggest reasons that we won the gold medal. And it was a genius substitution by Ralf Bistorff. And it was interesting because a lot of it, what we're going to talk about is leadership here. And that was absolute leadership, not just by Ralph, but by Jackie as well, because she understood what was happening. She understood the tactics. She understood the strategy that we had. She understood why Maya was going in and why Maya was the right person to fence the fencers coming up. It was so well done. So well executed.
Why do you take out a veteran on the biggest stage in the world of your sport and put in this young person who you don't know if they can handle the pressure?
If you think about leading teams, we've all done that on occasion. We've all said, I believe in this person. I believe in this young person who's able to do this particular project, this particular task. It's just what Ralph was doing. He saw that in Maya. And perhaps moreover, Jackie saw that in Maya.
Hmm.
and was willing to make that sub and for the good of the team. And they saw that Maya was the one who could get the biggest points gap against defenses coming up. And I think it was absolute genius. And that historic win for the gold medal there against Team Italy. And sure enough, we went on to tie for top of the medal table in fencing, along with Japan. We had a great games. We went from 12th place up to 6th place in media value, in part, of course, because of those gold medals,
Of
as well
course.
as the All-American final between Lauren Scruggs and Lee Kiefer, gold and silver, and Nick Atkins medal as well. So we had a really great games. We had a really great set of athletes from a media perspective as well. They understood that part of what they had a responsibility to do was to help us grow the sport. And I can't tell you how
Hmm.
valuable that is when you've got a team that understands we're here to do two things. We're here to win medals and do the best that we possibly can to field of play. And that's priority number one. But also, we understand that we've got a responsibility to grow this sport and give the advantages that fencing have got to a new generation and people, both the older athletes who've been to more than
Wow.
one games, like an Eli Dershowitz or a Lee Kiefer or a Jackie Dubrovich or Kat Holmes, and the young rookies, I guess is the right word, like a Maya Weintraub, understood those
Wow.
obligations, and that was huge in going from 12th to 6th. And when you think about 6th, you're like, 6th doesn't actually sound that amazing. Think about the sports that naturally are above us: tennis, basketball, soccer, those with the big pro teams. Then you've got track and field and swimming. But think about some of the ones that means fencing was above. People like volleyball, people like wrestling, a traditional,
Hmm.
beloved Olympic sport in the United States of America. So we had a great games, and since we've been
Wow.
amongst the fastest growing sports by percentage in the Olympic and Paralympic movement. So we're delighted about that. We also
Wow.
sent our largest Paralympic delegation in 20 years. And since have doubled our para membership. So that's the Paralympic version of fencing. That means people with a physical impairment. Um, and so yeah, it's been so far. I mean, that's a lot of the tail of the tape of the last year. We've had some challenges as well, but the good news is the growth, the execution in Paris, and everything we've done since.
If this conversation with Phil hits for you as a leader, please take 5 seconds and text or email this episode to two people who need it. And if you want more conversations like this, hit subscribe so you never miss one. Going back to the media, like you said, went from 12th to 6th. Is that so? That's a ranking of Olympic sports and the media value of how it stacks
Yeah,
up. So
so
just explain us a little bit of
that's
how
right.
that.
Along with our colleagues at FinPR, our partners for the campaign going into the Olympics, we figured out a ranking of essentially media listening, is
Okay.
I think the term that we used, and ranked everybody in the Tokyo Games. And Tokyo was an unusual games for I think some fairly obvious reasons. We had some challenges in fencing. It's no secret that we had a sexual abuse scandal with a gentleman named Alan Hasdick during the Tokyo Games. We talked about that a little bit last time out and
Yes.
how we've had
Yes.
to turn that culture around. But also, of course, the Tokyo Games was during the pandemic. So we didn't have a lot of people on the ground. So there was a lot on the line, I think, not just for fencing, but for the Olympic and Paralympic movements in Paris.
Hmm.
So we prepared early. We started building those relationships with media outlets about a year before the games and really built them up and got them familiar with our athletes and our sport, which, see, as everybody knows, is not the most usual sport. And that really paid dividends. We actually had the most appearances on CNN. We had the most appearances on ABC, Good Morning America, of any sport. We had some really great social collaborations with Snoop Dogg and Flavor Flav and Bam Adebayo,
God.
the from the Miami Heat. That was a fun one too. So the basketball guys were all asked, well, what sport would you like to play if it wasn't basketball? And he answered fencing. So of course we jumped right on that, got in touch with his
Yes.
agent. We could make that happen.
Wait, who was that said
Um,
fencing? Who?
Bam Adebayo. He's on Team USA for basketball, so he came over
Yes.
and fenced one of our
Yes.
Olympians, Miles Chamley Watson.
Oh my
Miles is
gosh.
a great media character himself. Really understands the power of the media and has done for his entire career.
Oh,
So he actually just launched a pro fencing league, which we're delighted to see and happy to support as well. So another great piece of
yeah.
progress from one
So
of our incredible Olympians.
yeah, so many. So the one of the big things I'm taking away there is, hey, there had to be a bigger vision for U.S. fencing,
Yeah.
and you touched upon that last time, but we didn't know how it was all going to pan out, and we still don't know,
Right.
like down the road. So I want to, so listeners, if you go listen to that episode if you can, but Phil, when you took over U.S. fencing, it was an absolute crisis.
Yeah, look, we had some good green shoots of hope for sure.
What was the decision you made that turned everything around, or what turned it around? Because you came off all these huge wins and USA weightlifting, and
Yeah.
then you come into an organization that's got a lot of headwinds. 2 years later, boom. What did you do initially that really, like, because now you're kind of looking back and you're saying, hey, I did all these
Yeah.
things, but what were the things that I did that really were like the high leverage points that ended up
Yeah.
making the biggest difference?
Yeah, look, and the first thing I'll say is you don't turn around organizations by making one solo decision. You make them by making incremental good decisions. And personally, I find value, and I guess I've created a reputation for thinking a little bit differently, and for finding ways to do things differently and turn around organizations. And both weightlifting and fencing are old Olympic sports with deep, long-standing cultures within them. And I'm not a weightlifter, and I'm not a fencer, and I think that's been partly an advantage, and it's sometimes a disadvantage.
Hmm.
When I started to turn around USA weightlifting, one of the people we went and spent a lot of time with was British Cycling, who turned around cycling in the United Kingdom fairly quickly. And one of the biggest things that I took away from that was that a lot of your answers belong in your own membership. USA Fencing is a membership organization, so active fencers in the United States become members of USA Fencing to compete, whether that be at the Olympic Games or, hey, I picked up a sword 3 days ago and I'd like to go to a competition. That whole gamut comes through USA Fencing.
Hmm.
So the first thing I did, and I would recommend this to anybody taking over a similar membership-based organization, whether it's in sport or not, is go out there and listen. I did something called a listening tour, and I now do it every year. And I went and visited clubs across the country. Fencing doesn't happen in an office in Colorado. It just doesn't. It can, but it does not where our sport lives. Our sport lives
They don't
in
like bringing swords to the
fencing.
office. Yeah.
It's not as frowned upon in our office as it might be in most. In our office,
Sure.
it's sort of a tool of the trade. I wouldn't
Yeah.
recommend that to most people, showing up with a sword in your office. We
Yes.
actually share an office building with archery, so we literally
Oh.
bring a knife to a bow and arrow fight, I guess. Um, we should really invite shooting to
Uh,
be a third wheel in that, and
oh
just have
yeah, you have the most
combat. Like
dangerous offices in
it's
America. Yeah.
Right, exactly, yes.
Yeah.
One dangerous place, Colorado Springs, Colorado. But it's um in all seriousness, that was the biggest thing is go out and listen to your membership. In fencing, I'm lucky. We have a really, really smart, well-educated membership who may not necessarily be experts in running sport organizations, but
Hmm.
they're experts in what they do and how they see their sport. Um, and that was a big deal. And that's the biggest thing I
Hmm.
could recommend to any new leader, almost any organization, but particularly a member organization like a USA Fencing or an association, professional association. That's a big place you can go. You'll get a sense of the feeling on the ground. What do people really want in that membership? What's going to get them going? What's, from a
Hmm.
revenue perspective, where are they going to spend money and where do they
Hmm.
begrudge spending money? What do they see as service to them and what do they see as not really service to them? What do they see as the biggest problems and what's their viewpoints on solving those? And it won't be that you meet one chap or lady in, let's say, New York City who changes your world. You might, but you're probably going to meet two or three people with similar themes. And you
Mm-hmm.
can interpolate that information and take something from Joe, something from Jane, something from Fred, and bring those things together. And that's the solutions that you need. Because at that point, you've got three or four things. One, when you roll this out, you sort of know it's going to be that change is going to go relatively well because you've heard it from the field. The second thing is you're listening to people who are hopefully across the country in a national organization like this. You're hopefully listening to people from diverse backgrounds within the sport. And as a result, you're finding things to put in those programs that please multiple different people. The other thing that happens is as a leader, it humanizes you. So when you go and you talk to people about their sport, that's their passion. That's what they love to do.
Yeah.
That's how they spend their evenings and weekends. In some way, at times, their full-time job is fencing. So you're talking with people about their passion, but also you become a humanized person yourself. You have that coffee, you break the bread, you have dinner with people, you go to their club, you watch them fence to do what they love. And that was a big, big part of everything we've done since, every idea that we've had since. So, earlier this year, we announced the first USA Fencing Academy, which is a in-person private school. Why? We have a lot of people to whom academics is really important. We have a lot of people to whom fencing is really important. There's a lot of people looking, how do I combine those in the most efficient way, both from a cost effectiveness perspective and from an effectiveness of the product perspective? Did one person say, you should open a private school dedicated to fencing? No, but there's the interpolation of a lot of those ideas across the country was partly what led there. Would that have happened in weightlifting? No, different audience, different problems, different solutions.
Yeah.
So I think,
So
if you're
good.
thinking
Yeah.
for that one massive takeaway, it's go and listen to your, whatever they might be in your world, customers. And it's a two-way street. I listened to one of your podcasts. It was the gentleman who was the former president of Legoland. And I sort of appreciated what he had to say because he was talking about something which is inherently fun. When you go and you experience a theme park, you expect to walk in the front door, have a great time that day, and walk out. That's
Yep.
basically your expectations, right? Whereas, what I enjoyed about what he had to say was all of the different things that go into that day, which you just don't think about, and you shouldn't think about that as a customer. Like, what are the problems? Lines. Making sure the rides are running, making sure the customer experience is good, making sure the inflow and outflow are good. How do I sell the tickets? All of those things are what we have to think about, but it's the same symptom. The customer who walks in the front door to have their fencing experience is looking for a smooth, good, enjoyable fencing experience in both their events and in the clubs. And the clubs we certify, the events we run. So it's, again, going there and listening to those customers and also explaining how that back of house works in kind of the same way he was doing on his version of the Lead the Team podcast.
So good.
I think he's really valuable.
Yeah, I really like those parallels. And for leaders, I mean, you like just thinking about this from Phil's standpoint, you had success with USA weightlifting. You went from very little gold to no gold to gold medals. You had won, and a lot of leaders are like, okay, that playbook worked. I'm going to bring my playbook to USA fencing. But that's not what you did. I mean, you obviously had your playbook, but you're like, no, I'm going to start by not coming in as the expert in how to turn around a sport and win gold. I'm going to come in, I'm going to listen, make those notes. And it seems like, too, instead of saying like looking for the one winning person who could really give you insight, you kind of expected, you're like, hey, I'm going to listen and I'm going to try to take like one or two ideas from each person to sort of build this bigger profile. And I think it's a really great way to go about it. I wanted to ask you, you really, it just came across to me so strongly when you talked about sort of this media ranking and value that you've been able to increase for your sport. What's your advice for leaders who want to punch above their weight, so to speak? Because you're landing, I'm looking at your sponsors. You've got Hilton, right? You've got Avis, you've got some major ones, and you're a little niche sport. And what in the world are you doing to punch above your weight from that standpoint?
Yeah, and I'm happy to go into that. So I do want to just pick up on the gold medal side to be really clear.
Yeah.
The first and foremost credit for any medal on the field of play goes to the athlete, and the second goes to the coach. The our job is to create an atmosphere in which they can
Right.
succeed.
You're providing the
And
ecosystem, the developmental
that's right.
area, right? And
Uh,
the business engine behind it, because they don't get there
yes,
just magically, right? Someone's got to pay for it.
correct.
Someone's got to set this up because there's not going to be very many gold medals in future Olympics if that doesn't exist.
That's right. And we have to build the business behind it to grow the sport, to grow the ecosystem that supports them, not just the elite athletes, but the athletes below that too. So it's the whole picture of the sport in the country. I will say that we were in very nice performance shape coming out of Tokyo as well. To your point, weightlifting won gold in the Paris Olympic Games with Olivia Reeves. That was touching as well to see Olivia progress to that point, and to
Gotcha.
see some of the programs that
Yeah.
we put in place do well. The performance side at fencing, to be clear, was doing pretty well under Kate Riesinger. We had a lot of other issues to solve. But let me come to your point around sponsors and commercial agreements. So um, I think there's you actually said it pretty well yourself around niche, understanding what that niche is, and how it can be leveraged and by whom. So you said, what are your pieces of advice? And I think I've got a few. One is understanding who your people are and how you can use them. So in our world, you know, who understands fencing, who's in our audience, who's already in our ecosystem, and how can
Hmm.
we leverage those individuals? Who fenced in college was a question I asked here. Couldn't do that weightlifting, we didn't have college. So
Hmm.
that's a good place to start in people who already understand the value of fencing and understand how fencing works and what fencing is all about and the beauty of fencing. How else did we leverage it? Well, we understand who our audience really is, frankly, what the demographic is,
Hmm.
where they live, who they are, how many people there are in their household, all of those basic demographics that come into commercial sponsorship agreements. And therefore, who should we be targeting? Who does that make sense for? What do we do a lot of? Well, you mentioned Hilton Davis. We do a lot of travel. That makes a lot of sense. We also have a lot of people in our families who are business travelers. So Avis
Hmm.
and Hilton want to reach those same people because they want to secure not just their fencing business, but their other business. How
Hmm.
can we help deliver that? It's not, commercial partnerships, I think, is always a critical word, because some people view sponsorship as just, I'm going to slap a logo on the side of a banner or shirt. And that's short term, it's going to work. Long term, that's not really going to work. So you've got to be able to go there and do something differently. In our case, sometimes we've said, look, we are sure that you have the right demographic and we're sure you're going to succeed in our sport.
Hmm.
We're actually going
Yes.
to say you can get out of our sponsorship agreement quickly if it doesn't provide the ROI for you. So that's something we've done differently. Another
Okay.
thing we've done differently is we've partnered up with 4 other NGBs to create something called the United Sports Collective, a sort of an historic partnership between similar NGBs, because if you're not buying the sport for the reasons of the sport, you're buying it for the reasons of the people within it. Well, let's create scale for you by combining 5 of those sports. So we
Uh-huh.
formed a partnership with our friends at rowing and
Wow.
squash and cycling and sailing. And in early December, we'll announce the first successful partnership, actually with a guest, US Lacrosse in that particular one. And hopefully 1 or 2 more to follow that shortly afterwards. So I think, to
Yeah.
your point of
Wow.
how do you do that with a niche, I think the biggest things are understand what that niche is and ask. Don't be afraid to ask. I made a career out of asking questions. I
Hmm.
started my career by the NHL locked out, and I made a phone call and said, "Hey, would you come and play the Sheffield University and Sheffield Hallam University Bears?" And to my surprise and shock, they said yes. That's literally where I started, was just by
Okay.
asking a question.
I and in that I hear how, and I hope this is resonating, thinking deeply about the possibilities. What's the value that you add to Hilton Avis? How does it work so well with your brand? And I love this idea of finding other people in other niches where there's overlap and increasing the value in those alliances and partnerships. I love
No,
the
absolutely.
I, I love the screaming in the background.
Okay, you
That's
ready to go?
clearly the that's clearly the
Beautiful.
it's not happening in the office right now. It's not
No, I am
it's not
working
a
from home
sword
today,
fight.
and my 2-year-old did her best saber fencer impression. So it's
That's so awesome.
uh,
But yeah,
she appealed to the
but I
referee, and I
think
think it's her point.
yeah, yeah, getting, but you got to get in and really think deeply about this. Like you say, it's not just throwing a logo on a shirt. It's,
Yeah,
thinking about, what the possibilities are there.
and go and learn, and it's not just from podcasts like this. One of the places that I really learned about the commercial sponsorship world, which we've done pretty well in here, is from McLaren Racing.
Hmm.
And looking at what they've
Okay.
done, and the way they changed sponsorship and the expectations of it in F1, and the way they constructed partnerships there in McLaren Racing, it is really influential. In again, whilst they have obviously a lot more worldwide exposure than fencing does on a day-to-day basis, they really looked at how do we make partnerships deeper? How do we make partnerships do something more than they do
Hmm.
today? And that was really a lot of what we took here at fencing and ran with this. And again, it comes back to listening. What did I do? I went and looked at who's good at this and listened to them.
Oh man. Have you read Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point?
I have
Yeah.
not.
Okay. Are you familiar? Well, I don't know if you've read a lot about it, but they talk about Harvard and niche sports. Are you familiar with
Yes.
well, like for the readers? So in Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point, Malcolm points out that elite schools recruit heavily for sports like fencing, not just for
Correct.
athletics, but Malcolm's point is to attract wealthy, privileged students. So, do you feel like, and then by the way, it's not just fencing, it's like tennis is a big one, women's rugby,
Yeah.
these niche sports. Do you think fencing still
Yeah.
has that reputation? And
It
what do you
does.
think about changing it or not changing it from a leadership standpoint?
Look, I think when I first got here, and perhaps even when we were speaking last time, I sort of was still in the mindset of we need to be all things to all people. There is a reality to fencing attracts partly because of what it is. It's physical chess, just a smart human being to be successful at it. It's a thinking person's game, which is part of the challenge of fencing, which means that you're surrounded by these incredibly intelligent, thought out people who are sort of have an engineering, law, or medical type mindset, and that's where a lot of
Hmm.
fencers tend to end up. So there's a link there. It is an expensive sport when the travel adds up quickly and so forth. The 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 load of training adds up quickly. And so there's a degree to which I think we lean in two ways. One is, yes, we do have an appeal to that affluent demographic, and I think there's no hiding that. Um, I think that demographic is different to the one that is traditionally thought of in fencing. We are actually the number one most diverse sport in the NCAA, primarily because of our Asian American community.
Hmm.
But I do think that the other way that we can lean in is through projects like Peter Westbrook Foundation, Peast in Brooklyn, Nelia down in Atlanta, and now two foundations that we've helped our athletes grow in the Eli Dershowitz Foundation in Boston and the Nick Itkin Foundation in Los Angeles, to where we can bring individuals who meet those academic criterion, but don't necessarily have the family backing into our sport through grant funding. So
Hmm.
I think those are the two ways that we can really both embrace that a more affluent demographic that our sport naturally seems to attract, but also cater to folks who can't afford otherwise to come into a sport like ours. And there's projects out there in similar sports. We talked about rowing earlier. Rowing are really good at this, and bring them into and give them those opportunities. To your point, to get into a Harvard, a Duke, an MIT, and so forth. Fencing and some of our sister sports, like the ones we've talked about, uh, are heavily present in those very high-end academic institutions. And it's no secret that I think I'd like to think most kids come into the sports because the sport of fencing, they find something that they love. But when you're spending a lot of money as a parent, there is something you do want to see an ROI. And I understand for a lot of parents that ROI to them can come in to the idea that this sport can help my child get into those universities. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to admit that's part of our sport.
USA Fencing has faced some serious national scrutiny, from gender policy investigations to historic misconduct cases that you alluded to before. As CEO, how do you balance winning Olympic gold with rebuilding trust and leading through that kind of culture and political pressure? And by the way, y'all, if you're a company leader, that kind of pressure, this is something unique. This is really amps up the flame of feelings as a leader. And some of this stuff is not stuff that you kind of inherited as a mess early on. So,
you're right.
How do you balance it?
And it's been a challenge, Ben. It's last year has been quite the year. To your point, we've had significant issues with the transgender debate. Our then chair of our board, who's now stepped down, and as the past election this October, he was in front of Congress talking about transgender policy. We have had issues both ways in individuals who are transgender individuals who are taking legal action to try and restore access to fencing for transgender in their category of identity. We also have issues on the other side where we have individuals who are unhappy with previous policies which allowed transgender individuals to compete in their gender of identity. We ended up in a national media storm in April of 2025, which, for me personally included death threats, people showing up at my house, and members of my team suffering from similar. In one case, yes. We had issues where our team was being attacked, both personally in a lot of ways and as an organization. And notice I've not expressed a viewpoint on the matter of transgender athletics because our policy is now clear that you need to compete in the gender of your birth. That policy is aligned with that now of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And our two international federations, one for Olympic and one for Paralympic, both have similar policies.
And I read you had some pretty high-profile U.S. politicians taking a stand on it, which was particularly interesting. Why they decided to take a stand on that, but I was like, of all the things,
yeah.
But why? So you decide to keep your personal viewpoints on that. You don't talk about your personal view on it as a leader.
Yeah, look, I think when you,
or do you think that's important to do that, or what's your?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think when you lead an organization, you have to listen to your members. It means all of your members, and we have members who are distinctly find that inclusion is a very core value. We also have folks who are staunchly of the belief that transgender athletics shouldn't be something that is engaged in sport. I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, that the decisions need to be based upon competitive realities. Decisions need to be based upon on science. Both sides of those arguments need to be listened to. And it's important as a leader to have that middle ground in a organization with diverse viewpoints. And I think a lot of national governing body leaders have faced similar challenges this year, although none as public as us. And we ultimately did end up in the national media. To your point, we had politicians from both sides, from the red and blue side of politics, engaging with USA Fencing and about our sport, and that was very stressful and very challenging to go through. Yeah. We had protests at our events. We had challenges again with both sides of this argument and the way that people were reacting, and we're sort of still dealing with that today, some nearly 6 months later, or just over 6 months later. But it was we got put through the ringer, no question about it. We had to defend our sport. and our organization at the very highest level of Congress and media. And the best way that you can lead through that is just by transparency and honesty. Number one, what do you know? What do you not know? Taking quick action to protect people is really important, especially amongst our team. We had to close the office at one point in order to protect our people. We had to engage in things like delete me to make sure people can be traced, and things that protect your people are really important first and foremost. Trying to help people see the different sides of the argument that their perspective may not necessarily carry, and trying to ensure that logic and rational rather than emotional action is put at the center. In other words, what is going to serve us best long term as an organization, as a sport? What protects us and this sport and our athletes the best? Rather than necessarily one particular portion or other of our membership that might have a given viewpoint. Yeah. So, Ben, it was a tough year. I mean, we were front and center on both the for and against transgender athletics debate. We've for those who are going, what are we talking about? We had a fencer take a knee that went viral, and it went through Fox News, CNN, Newsmax, even the BBC in the UK picked it up.
She was in a big tournament and she refused to fight, or I forget, what do you call? Don't call it fight. You call on guard.
Yeah, whatever, so it was
refused to fence against the other person.
Correct.
Who was a biological male competing as a female, correct? In the female bracket.
Correct. So we had a policy at the time which allowed transgender women to compete in the women's category, provided they meet certain criteria around hormonal therapy and so forth, which that individual particularly did. The fencer took a knee, refused to fight, which accrues a black card, which is basically the same as a red card in soccer, or a match penalty in.
She's banned from the tournament, or she's kicked out of the tournament with the black card.
Yeah, that's right. You kicked out the tournament if you refuse to fence your opponent, and then there's an automatic probation goes along with that. There's no ban that carries forward. It was a relatively low level would be unfair, but a sort of middle level tournament, a regional tournament. So. And then that sort of exploded across the country very, very quickly within about a week. And that's what sort of led us down the pathway of the experience of the last 6 months. And the where we are today in Olympic sport is that the USOPC, we put in, well, first of all, in April, we put in what we call a trigger policy, which essentially meant that when the USOPC, which is our Olympic committee, here in the US, the IOC, which is the Worldwide Olympic Committee, or the FIE, changed their policy essentially to allow us to be compliant with something called the Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act. We would change ours, and that happened in very late July. So our policy and theirs is now that, without going into the complexity of it, essentially that you compete in the gender of your birth.
Got it. Okay. So the policy is clear, and that's and you had to deal with it all. I mean, what's that like on a personal standpoint from you, from being, man, everything here is going well. We faced the crisis when we came in. We're on the podium. We're blowing away all of our previous metrics. We're having historical wins. And then months later, you're put through the national ringer, politically from all this.
Yeah. Stuff. I mean, I guess from out the frying pan into the fire might be the right analogy, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the good news, bad news that I've been through crisis as a leader before, both in weightlifting with the doping crisis in weightlifting, and then, with some of the coming into fencing and rebuilding trusting fencing as well. Bad news, no one likes a crisis. It's not what you want to have. It was, for me personally, it was challenging. It weighed on me. It weighed on me from the effects on people personally on both sides of the argument, not just our transgender women who are facing issues of where do they compete now, but also people like Stephanie Turner, who was passionate enough in her beliefs to take the action that she did, and herself found national exposure through that, and that brings with it its own challenges. Working through the issues with some of my colleagues across the Olympic and Paralympic movement as well has been challenging. It's difficult to express in words how much of a toll that's taken on me personally, on the organization, while still trying to drive the organization, to your point, Ben, forward and accruing those sponsorship agreements that we have, growing the sport in the way that we have, bringing the exposure to the sport from a positive perspective we have. It's been, the only way I've been able to do that is by compartmentalizing the noise. Of saying, look, these issues are happening. That's going to be 30-40% of my life is going to be dealing with those issues and the resulting debates and feelings and issues that are coming up in our membership about them. But on the other hand, I still need to dedicate that time and effort to growing what we're doing and achieving our strategic plan and what we're really supposed to be doing about growing the sport of fencing in the United States. And it has, just being frank, it's been a very, very challenging 6 or 7 months. I took for the first time about 3 days where I just disconnected from my phone. We actually went on a cruise. And fun fact, they have a package there which includes the drinks package and the Wi-Fi. I said, can I not have the Wi-Fi, please?
Good move. The temptation is great. Yes.
Exactly. It was really great to just turn everything off for a few days and reflect. And it really was sort of, when you're going at 100 miles an hour, trying to get everything moving in a positive way, but also dealing with some of the issues that are coming up and those very serious issues. Yeah. Not forgetting that, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we're coming out of that sexual abuse crisis. We've had to turn that around too. We're still having to keep an eye on that and make sure that we're still doing all the right things in that space as well. We've rebuilt trust in the organization. We've built the organization up. All of those things still require attention. Growth requires a lot of effort and attention. You don't grow in a niche sport like fencing, or any sport really, even a big one like soccer, without effort and without asking, without going out there and outreach and all of that. That's been a lot. It just has. It's been a lot of time and effort and a lot of weight that's affected. Yeah, it has. It's affected me. It's affected my family. It's affected my team here at USA Fencing, and it's certainly affected our membership and our volunteer leaders as well. So it's a weight to deal with, and again, I'm trying to find the right way to put that. I can only say it's been a weight, and that break was really good for me to reflect, and without the support of honestly my amazing wife, and perhaps the distraction of my wonderful daughter, it would have been a different year that even more challenging to go through.
Wow. So yeah, man. It's been a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And it is so cool to see you all thriving in the face of all the adversity. And I just have a feeling that it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like, since the organization has been through so much, and you've been through it in such a microcosm amount of time, like one sport, going Olympic success, having all the controversy, having it bubble up to high political levels and getting through it. I mean, you guys have seen a lot. So just kind of putting a cherry on top of this, what do you hope the Phil Andrews legacy is going to be for USA Fencing?
I think that the sport can be promoted. Miles Chamley Watson has this phrase, create a movement, not a moment. And I kind of love it. And I think that that's what we've been doing over the last couple of years. There's a few things that even if I left fencing tomorrow, I think I could hang our team's hat on, not just mine. We have a women's championship in the NCAA for the first time. We just added 2 schools. I'm hoping by the time this podcast sees the light of day, we might be on 4 new schools in fencing, which is remarkable in a context of the House versus NCAA, college uncertainty. We've had our first ever national TV deal. We are now a sport which is a solid medium to large sport in the Olympic world, as opposed to a small sport. And I think that again, none of these are just me, but I think these are legacies that we're leaving behind, permanent legacies in the case of college sport, permanent legacies in the case of promoting the sport and the TV deals that we've done. And, I had a catchphrase for a long time at USA Weightlifting, which was "it can be done." It had a different meaning there. That meaning was about we can win, and inspiring our athletes, and then eventually them inspiring each other to that goal. Here it's been a little different. It's been more on the business side of the house and growing the sport and promoting the sport and making a very old sport seem cool. It meant a lot when I showed up to it's actually I was doing a presentation on culture to a business named Techno, which is a TV firm. They own a lot of regional TV networks. So, for example, here in Denver, where I live, they own 9 News, which is our NBC affiliate. And they invited me to come and talk about our experiences during the games, many of the things we talked about today, and talked about our cultural contract, which I'm not sure I've talked about in either podcast, but one of the things that we have amongst our team is a cultural contract on how we behave with each other, which has been a huge part of how we've succeeded. But one of the things that a couple of them came up to me and said, "I live in New York, and you can't move for talking about fencing right now." And I'm like, that's exactly the point. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Is make fencing buzz, make it feel like it's something you should be at least trying. And fencing's not for everybody, but at least
at the age of 50, you never know. I might do it. Where should I start? Saber or foil or what?
You should go and just try it. It doesn't matter which one. Go to your local club. Epee is arguably the easiest to pick up because you don't have something called right of way.
Okay.
If you love film and you love Mask of Zorro, or you love the Pirates of the Caribbean or Princess Bride, a lot of that really resembles Saber most. So I'd try Saber. Foil is what we're really good at in this country. So, go to your local club, just give it a go. And by the way, you can start at 50. We just came home from Bahrain, where our Veterans World Championship team earned 33 medals for a world leading total for the third year in a row. So we have a lifelong sport that one of the folks I can tell you about, Vic Bianchini, is a judge out in San Diego. And he took up fencing in his 70s. He's now in his 80s. And he actually represents Portugal internationally. So he was there in Bahrain at the World Championships as the oldest athlete there, and he started in his 70s.
Wow. All right. That's some inspiration. Y'all take it out, pick up. Try it out. I'm going to give this a shot. Phil, thanks for joining us today. It's a fun one. Looking forward to having you on a third time in the future. No doubt there will be gold discussed.
Let's see.